Thank you for joining us for another episode of Carta de Vinay. This week it's all about migration with a couple of special people joining us from various parts of the UK and Europe. Welcoming Professor Ruxandra Trandafoiu and Irina Diana Madrane. Nicola, would you do the honors, please, and introduce Ruxandra for us? Thank you.
Yes, of course. So, yeah, it's my pleasure to be able to introduce Ruxandra Trandafoiu this evening. Ruxandra is Professor of Politics, Communication and Diaspora at Edge Hill University. She has published on Eastern European migration policies, diaspora activism, transnational mobilities, and nationalism. She is also interested in the way communication technologies support and enhance practices of mobility, border crossing, and cosmopolitanism. She is the author of Diaspora Online, Identity Politics and Romanian Migrants, and The Politics of Migration and Diaspora in Eastern Europe, Media, Public Discourse and Policy, as well as several edited collections, including the 2 volumes we will be discussing this evening, Border Crossings and Mobilities on Screen, published in 2022, and Migration, Dislocation and Movement on Screen, published in 2024. Thank you, Ruxandra.
Thank you, Nicola. I'd like to say a few words about how these books came about. So these 2 books, which are obviously about mobility and border crossing, were actually written and edited during the pandemic. So in an immobile world, as we were huddled at home in our makeshift offices, we were researching, writing about, and visualizing mobility and border crossing. And in a way, this paradox was apt because it reflected the incongruities embodied by migration. We have lived with movement, travel, and repeat border crossings in our everyday lives. We've come to consider them a natural part of being in the world. And yet, movement is also one of the most noticed, disputed, and curtailed human activities. And it comes with other contradictions too. We choose mobility, but we find it costly financially and emotionally. We crave to travel and experience new things, but we find adapting to other geographic and cultural spaces hard work. We crave to return, but choose not to. We get lost when we have never had better knowledge or technological support. So the books, like most of my research, started from the need to document to a certain extent my own contradictory feelings about being a migrant, a traveler through the world, at a time when I often felt unable to cope with immobility. I don't know how you all found the pandemic period and the lockdowns, but during the pandemic, I found it very, very hard to understand why I was in so much psychological distress. I still had my job. I was surrounded by family. We somehow managed to stay healthy. My home was safe, cozy. One explanation that I came up with was that pandemic forced me to repeat the experience of growing up in communist Romania. Constraints about where I could go and between what times of the day, no travel abroad, enforced communal socializing at times, being huddled together in small spaces with no enough privacy, being under constant observation, and being controlled by often absurd rules. The mask that I had to wear occasionally stripped my identity too, forcing me to blend in, just like socialism. Since the 1990s, I had traveled and moved obsessively, and even when I was in place, I was often thinking of the next journey, of another border crossing, real or symbolic. So no wonder the pandemic's enforced mobility was hard. because I think, my generation who grew up in communism, in communist Romania, had this sort of desire to travel, to move, to cross borders, and this suddenly was taken away. In a way, the books offered a psychological relief of some sort, in that they were about mobility as a common and natural pursuit at a time when it was denied. And as an editor, I was simultaneously occupying several remote spaces. While I connected with the contributors, I also traveled symbolically. The projects also offered me the opportunity to delve into micropersonal experiences, from audiences experiencing the world through a screen, be it a mobile phone, a TV, train station display, or travel app, through to filmmakers or migrants documenting their own border crossing. The book's chapters told very personal stories. More importantly, these stories express the contradictions I was talking about in the beginning: imagined departures, stilted arrivals, longing, inadaptability, perpetually delayed return, painful dislocation, alien spaces, being stuck, symbolic geography, and the politics that comes with all of these experiences. These micro stories told the bigger story of migration as a hated, denied, and ultimately risky pursuit. Editing these books also brought the realization that media and technology, now natural extensions of our bodies, are helping us mediate our movement across borders, real and symbolic, and are allowing us to document all these unique experiences. So the books were important because they came about at an interesting time, to write about mobility. And also because it kind of allowed this kind of crossover between personal experience, particularly my experience as a traveler, migrant, somebody who feels dislocated most of the time, and the bigger story about migration, the policies around it, the political context, and so on and so forth. But I think, ultimately, the very sort of personal stories encapsulated in quite diverse chapters were, what sustained me during this period. And at this point, I would like to invite my colleague, Diana Modrane, to say a few words about the chapter she co-authored with Adina Baya in one of the books. Because that chapter for me encapsulates this moment of storytelling and expressing these very sort of intimate experiences of migration. Diana is Associate Professor of Applied Linguistics at West University of Timișoara in Romania. So, Diana, would you like to say a few words about how your chapter came about?
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here tonight and to share this experience. We went through a similar time during the lockdowns, obviously, and we were very connected through various screens to other people's experiences, and at the time, it was something that we really wanted to write about, my colleague and I. I will switch to we because I'm also representing Adina Baya from the Department of Journalism at our university. And around that time, there was this new journalistic project, which in the meantime has become better known, and some of you may be familiar with it, The Recorder. It's a newsroom journalistic project that engage in a different type of journalism in the Romanian media landscape. They are a non-profit, so they have a different type of business model. They do investigative journalism as well, and they experience with style, genres, and in particular particular, they seek to represent marginalized viewpoints and to invite this grassroots, bottom-up, more immersive experience of various social categories. And the Romanian migrants, as well as their families in Romania, are occasionally among the subjects that they represent and construct and discuss in their journalism. So in 2019, during the winter holidays, they released this video reportage, which also became viral, about the traveling of a Christmas parcel from a Romanian village in Moldova called Neamț in the east part of the country, all the way to London and Coventry. And what was new about the traveling of the Christmas parcel and the way in which it was mediated, filmed, and presented to the audience was the fact that they chose this ethnographic mobile journalistic method of following the parcel themselves. All the voices that are represented in the documentary are migrant voices and ordinary people's voices, also some Romanians in the UK and Brits who talking about their encounters with Romanian migrants in the final part of the reportage, and obviously the Romanian, family members, of the Romanian families. So the voices of journalists are basically absent. They are implicit, they are implied, sometimes in the answers to questions. But except for some general information about migration, everything is the point of view and the experience, in particular, the lived experience of transnational Romanian families. So that was one point of interest for us. And how is this different from what you can find in the mainstream legacy media as a representation of Romanian migrants and transnational ways of living? And the other point of interest was the creation, the constitution, the lived enactment of the transnational co-presence that I believe you are a lot more familiar with than myself. And I live in Romania most of the time. But that feeling of being, an experience of being both here and there, which is often supported by physical mobility. During the pandemic, not possible, as Ruxandra said earlier, but is also supported via virtual communication and via various imagined ways of being in the other space, and also via this presence by proxy that is through different people, through different objects in particular. And the Christmas parcel has a very special meaning, and it also comes associated with very special emotions and can foster affective and emotional responses. And our question was, how does this new type of video reportage and of doing journalism facilitate, enable, via the choice of the subject, filming, and journalistic approach, a connection, an emotional and affective connection of viewers, both migrants and non-migrants, to this lived experience of the transnational, Romanian transnational families, of being both here and there. The parcel, as I've said, is followed from the country of origin all the way to the UK. And most of the shots are close-ups and medium shots of the mother's hands packing the foods, and her face also shown, her affective embodied response to being in this situation, and also a sort of ritualistic way of doing this. It's been done many, many times before. And the same thing happens when the children unpack the parcel, the Christmas parcel, in the UK, and the same type of filming, and also a sort of rough, non-processed mobile camera, as I've said, approach to filming all this, and enabling viewers to follow this experience and to live it through this performativity, not in the sense of, putting on a performance, but in the sense of living it as it happens in motion, through this journalistic project. And the theories, we've relied on various theories, but the one I've already cited belongs to Loretta Baltazar. There is another thing that she says, and is also present in the work of other scholars, has to do with the recreation of physical presence through the tangibility of these objects. The object that the parcel that mom prepares becomes, in a way, the embodied presence of mom in the UK. And the affective and emotional connection that can be enabled, fostered through this type of filming involves viewers living, as I said, through this experience, and connecting in different ways depending on their background and other experience. And right, we haven't done any sort of audience research on that, but the responses to this video reportage of both migrants and non-migrants online indicates that it is the type of experience that we analyzed and we interpreted as being. And how does it differ from mainstream media? In the mainstream media, there is also a semiotization of emotion that it is intended to enhance emotional engagement and affective engagement of viewers and audiences to the transnational experience, but that is often associated with the agenda of various institutional and political actors. It is instrumentalized as we've interpreted it in different contexts, whereas here the emotion and the experience themselves are simply introduced. There is a way of securing the immersion of viewers via the filming, and the choices made, which are semiotic, multimodal, and journalistic at the same time in the transnational social field. These networks that come into being via transnational relations practices and living both here and there, right? So I will stop here because I tend to speak a lot, but thank you for, I hadn't revisited the chapter in a while, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to go back to it.
Yes, and I think this also illustrates the importance of the camera, giving you that sort of intimate relationship with what happens on the screen, even as a viewer, but also allowing those that are involved in this kind of rituals to tell their story in a way that is not filtered through, represented, as you say, by somebody else, but they in a way they kind of represent themselves and their own feelings and emotions. So it's a much more direct way of understanding what people experience as a result of this separation from their natural environment in a way. So yeah, thanks for that. Nicola?
Yes, I have some questions prepared. We're sort of going to have a discussion now, but I was just wondering if there were any burning questions from anyone else listening. First, feel free to just turn your cameras on or unmute yourselves if you have a question. Otherwise, I can get going.
Yep. Please do ask your first question. Otherwise, guys, you can also use the chat to pose your questions. I'll keep adding from people offline or online that are also sending us some stuff. So feel free to come on. But first question to you, Nicola.
Sure, yeah. Well, I was wondering firstly, what is it about screens? And by that, I suppose I mean the moving image rather than the still image that kind of particularly interests you.
I suppose because you have to pay attention, because it's fleeting. You have to, it also allows you to tell a more extended, a more complete story. So it has a narrative that evolves. And it's not saying that there is a linear narrative here. It doesn't have to be linear, but it kind of plays also with your attention, your imagination. So I think in that sense, and also it's something that we're used to in a way. I mean, one of the things that I do say in one of the prefaces to the books is that it made me realize that first of all, the moving image is now common to so many media that it's not impossible to differentiate between media in traditional ways anymore, because these images travel through so many screens and types of media. But also that, we are immersed in moving images throughout the day as we're going about things. So for example, in one of the books, we have some very interesting chapters about people taking trains and being confronted with a variety of screens and images that contextualize the experience of moving. So in a way, you're immobile because you're stuck on the train, but you're moving through landscape, and you're moving through different stories that these screens represent. And it's a multimedia experience that I think it's from my point of view, challenges academic constraints about doing research in television studies or film or things like that. In a way, I was very lucky that I was a media scholar or trained as a media scholar without therefore being necessarily put into a niche, because I know colleagues in film studies or television studies are very protective about their, let's say, academic universe. And I thought, no, that's not right. I think, these chapters really can tell you that, viewers experience the world through these images in very different ways than academics think. So yeah, so it was for me a sort of an interesting academic question around silos in academic research. And one aim of the books was to sort of bring the different academic voices together to talk to one another. And then there was this sort of recognition that this new media environment is also empowering people to a certain extent. So it's empowering viewers. It's allowing them to make sense of these stories. They make their own sense, like Diana was saying. As viewers watch these things happening online, they they can they can begin to make up their own stories and really link them to their own personal experiences, because we all have experiences of border crossing, of moving, of traveling, and so on.
Absolutely. I was wondering if you could elaborate with regard to the border crossings and mobilities on screen on this key aim to produce a book that eschewed Eurocentric tendencies and also that provided the opportunity to work with early career researchers and researchers from non-traditional academic backgrounds. I suppose you've kind of already alluded to that in terms of the breaking out of specific silos and that sort of thing, but you also involve journalists and filmmakers and artists.
Yeah, I mean, I think I thought, well, if we are to have a book, let's have it as diverse as possible. So I really sort of when I didn't necessarily get a wide enough representation of case studies, I went further and tried to be a bit more proactive in trying to recruit people to the book. So I was very happy when we had chapters that represent all continents apart from Australia. And, you know, I really was very keen to get Australian or New Zealand colleagues on board. It was just not possible despite my efforts at the time. Because, you know, it is a book about crossing borders and I wanted, you know, a diverse experience. And I wanted different perspectives. Often you look at edited collections, particularly in, you know, film studies, and they're very much about the European experience and the white experience. And this is something that, you know, increasingly, luckily, we're moving away from in academia. But it was a conscious effort to try and involve colleagues from different different parts of the world with their sort of different, you know, proposing different takes on what mobility means, different case studies, talking about films I never heard about, authors that I didn't necessarily hear about before. So it was a very enriching experience for me as an editor. And then I guess, you know, my philosophy has always been that I need, as a senior academic, to support the work of younger colleagues. And it was very rewarding, for example, when I got a picture from one of our contributors holding the book in his hands and he said, "This is my first ever publication. You know, thank you. I'm so proud." And for me, that was very, very rewarding. So, you know, you have seasoned academics and you have younger colleagues coming in. I think younger colleagues come with fresh perspectives and a new voice. And I think, you know, that's why we have to value people who are at the start of their academic journey. But also I wanted a non-academic perspective. So, and I think this happened almost naturally. So you can see there's teams of people actually writing some of the chapters and, you know, one is an academic and one is a journalist or an artist. And I think this is, again, a very important aspect of the work that we do, that we reach out, you know, across the boundaries of academia in order to understand the perspective of other colleagues and learn from that perspective.
I do have some more questions, but I see some popping into the chat. So, Serena, do you?
Yep, I'll go to that. So first of all, from Nurten Bayraktar, I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Thank you for your question. Considering that the media shaped the public perception, how was the general attitude of representation? Do they tend to show dominant narratives or open up space for more empathetic understandings?
Well, yes, that's why, again, we try to showcase as many examples of people working with the issue of migration as possible, because of this, the dominance of certain narratives about migration. Now, obviously, the problem we have here is that nobody reads academic books, and it's very difficult to have an impact on what the larger public thinks, even when you're trying to bring in all these diverse voices and to show all these diverse perspectives and promote the work of people that the majority of us might not have heard about before. So that is a challenge, but we have to try. I think by understanding what the limitations are in academia, we evolve, we develop, we change the way we do things as well. We try and, get out there and express ourselves and our differing perspectives sometimes. And also, I think the books also show that increasingly migrants begin to self-represent themselves. Sometimes this happens because, they want to chart their journey. For example, one of the chapters talks about the mobile phone being a recorder of somebody's success or failure at crossing a border. And these stories continue to sort of inspire others to keep going, to keep trying. I think it is very important for people to receive a voice and be able to tell their own stories. And I think, some of the media and some of the case studies in the books show that this is possible, is beginning to become possible. One question that I have is, yes, the sort of traditional media still dominates political discourse, let's say, but how many people watch that, or for how long sort of traditional media is sustainable in the future. So I think, as long as people use the technology to self-represent, then we can change the media landscape.
Thank you for that. Another question from Julia Misir. Again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. I was wondering about the creative challenges that arise when representing dislocation and mobility on screen, especially with when filmmakers are not themselves part of the migrant experience. How do questions of authenticity or perspective shape that process?
Yes, it's interesting. To what extent you can represent the experience of others rather than yourself, but that's the nature of the medium in a way. And this is why I was saying, as long as we have a democratization of technology where access is possible and people, and it is possible, let's face it. I think one of the first observations that I had when I moved to London in 1999 was as the mobile technology was coming in, and yes, phones were still the size of bricks. But it was becoming more and more common to to have something that resembled a mobile phone or what we understand by mobile phone today. And at the time I was working with asylum seekers, and I could see that the first thing people did when they arrived in the UK was to buy a mobile phone. Now they have this mobile phone before they arrive in the UK or anywhere. And I think from this point of view, technology has been brilliant in terms of democratization, allowing people to self-represent again. Yeah, I mean, I think I have a problem with the term authenticity in many ways, because I think, human experience can also be common to most of us, particularly because, as I was saying, displacement and mobility is now a very common condition for most of us in the world. We've all experienced it to some extent, even for shorter periods of time. I think if we also think of filmmaking as an art, it's not just one person making a film; it's a team of people making a film. And some of these team include experts, people who can talk from personal experience, researchers, and migrants themselves.
And if we talk about journalistic projects like the one we analyzed, and also documentary films, nowadays there are long periods of immersion in communities that filmmakers and journalists embark upon precisely to understand the experience. Of course, there will always be limitations in that sense, but there is an active, conscious effort, at least among the filmmakers I had the experience to encounter at events or to talk to have documentaries, and that's also a different thing. It's a different genre than fictional film. To live this experience or something as close to it as possible before putting it on screen, I guess.
Thank you very much. And a few more, just because you mentioned socialism at the very beginning. Can you point to screen texts that address this paradox, the foremost so veiled who become self-disclosing actors online, and how do they stage the politics of consent and control? This question is linked to two perspectives. So, given Romania's history of surveillance under communism, how do contemporary Romanian screenmakers negotiate a legacy in your experience and present digital exposures in their films? And are there any distinct aesthetic strategies that mark post-communist audiovisual work, if that touches at all what you have seen so far?
Well, it's not something we tackle in these edited collections, but obviously Romanian New Wave has engaged with a lot of experiences from the socialist period. I think, the fact that you have sometimes very intrusive camera going in and looking very closely at details or objects, that also often the filming takes place inside in very sort of narrow, confined spaces, which remind us that the confinement of socialism, where everybody huddled together in a space that felt suffocating at times. So I think it's, the Romanian New Wave, but also, other filmmakers from the Eastern Bloc have engaged with the memory and the trauma and the experience. And it's not just filmmakers. A friend of mine who is an artist, a Romanian artist now living in Colorado, actually created one of the book covers. Marius Lehene, his work is all about sort of translating into his visual art some of the historical experiences of growing up in the socialist period among, let's say, the cement blocks typical to communist cities. So I think there is a whole generation out there, and actually this generation is important. People like Christian Mungiu and others, these are people who, or my friend Marius, who, people who grew up in communism and then experience the post-communist transition and are able to kind of write from those two perspectives, from the perspective of the historical dislocation and the ideological dislocation as well.
Fantastic. One more. How do Romanian diasporic media practices, like YouTube channels, Facebook groups, remediated TV, figure in your analysis of mediated mobility, both as site of memory and as platforms of vulnerability?
Okay, so this is not something I tackle directly in here, but I've got an article coming out which I wrote with my friend Ekaterina Balabanova from the University of Liverpool recently about how Romanian and Bulgarian women use Facebook groups. And for example, one of the things that we found quite interesting by following these Facebook groups and the way migrant women engaged with the kind of semi-public space of social media was that, on the one hand, these groups offered opportunity and a certain degree of freedom. So people, for example, women could engage in small businesses from the comfort of their homes. They could make a little bit of money on the side. They could sell products that were very sort of important for the community. So, for example, a great degree of traffic is around, posts that sell jams and pickles and sausages and homemade stuff, going back to Diana's chapter now, things that people crave as migrants that sort of trigger certain memories and tastes and experiences that go back to childhood. So a lot of the women managed to sort of recreate through the little economy of Facebook groups, through the objects that they were selling, the fashions, the hairstyles, the nails, everything else. They were, refashioning in the way Little Romania abroad, or Little Bulgaria abroad. But at the same time, this was spaces of constraint that was separating the women from the rest of the society, because it became very, very obvious that they were very comfortable in talking Romanian, engaging with other Romanian people, eating Romanian, dressing Romanian, and everything else. And to me, this was erecting an invisible border between this sort of online community and the rest of the society. Now, it doesn't mean to say that this separation translates in everyday life as well, but to a certain extent it does. So I think, yes, social media can be, instruments of freedom and expression and allowing identity to be refashioned in the way. I don't think it's preserved. I think it's refashioned. But at the same time, there is a danger here that diasporic communities isolate themselves from the larger social and political context of the host society.
Thank you very much.
Worked a lot. I mean, I haven't worked a lot on that either, but I'm interested in resistance and a sort of citizenship, symbolic citizenship, rhetorical citizenship forms of engagement. And there are ways of using social media, and that happens occasionally. For instance, before the diaspora protest in 2018, was it? Where Romanian members of the diaspora used social media to protest against certain narratives in the Romanian mainstream and political positions that sought to shame them in some way. So there is that. And there is also, I wanted to analyze these videos on YouTube, but I haven't managed to in the end. But right after Brexit, actually right after the new regulations imposed by Brexit came into effect, there were all sorts of videos of Romanian crossing borders, I mean the border into the UK, and recording that experience and explaining to other Romanians what it was like. However, as Ruxandra said, somehow I haven't found a lot of evidence of this type of discourse and positioning on the Romanian diasporic social media. But sometimes I wonder whether I know where to look for these particular instances. But most often I encounter the same type of discourse that Ruxandra and Katerina have analyzed.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Nicola.
I was wondering if you could elaborate on the fact that an important achievement of this body of work is the re-elaboration of the theme of otherness or strangeness, and the fact that this offers opportunities to talk in detail about strategies of othering, but more importantly, allow strangers to tell their own stories. And this in turn allows audiences to move away from parochial, nationalistic, and ideologized storytelling. And you say that accordingly, films about migration are films of ambivalence, and that while empathy plays a big part, we're never far from compassion fatigue. I wondered if you could talk a bit more about that sort of tension.
Well, I think, there's certain narratives that we almost expect. And actually, in fact, when you look at some of this work, it surprises us because, it either, looks at the minutiae of, emotional experience. And I think that's not always evident in some of the things that we know about migrants and migration. It shows how, how diverse the experiences can be from person to person. But also, it shows how resilient people are, how, they can achieve and they can survive and they can remake themselves due to circumstances, usually adverse circumstances. So, and it also, makes it okay to be different, to be strange, and to express yourself differently from the majority of the population. And actually, one of the things that I'm wrestling with at the moment, I was telling Sorina that I'm planning to write a new book, and it's all about, migrant performance. So how do you perform yourself? How do you perform your body? How do you perform other aspects of your individuality in a space that is alien and sometimes not very friendly to you? So what aspects of your identity you adapt to this alien environment that you are part of, and what you choose to preserve. So for me, that's, a very sort of interesting at the moment, philosophical question, but I'm hoping to put it into practice and get some voices to tell some interesting stories about how they negotiate that strangeness.
I wondered if you could elaborate on your and Shannon's chapter, which focused on the work of Egyptian-British filmmaker Khaled El Hagar. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but and the argument that diasporic filmmakers develop a third eye acuity that is a source of much needed innovation and perspectivism. And yes, sort of that in relation to exploring European cinema's colonial legacy and the impact of dislocation on double consciousness, difference, hybridity, citizenship, and memory.
Yes, so El Hagar made a very interesting film called Room to Rent, and that was his first feature film in the UK. However, it wasn't his first feature film as a filmmaker, because he started his career in Egypt, and after some time spent in Birmingham and London, went back to Egypt and has a very successful career in Egypt. So I've known Khaled for about 15 years, and we've had several conversations. And I think, the way I understand it, and, I agree with the way he explains it, is that, migration and the need to prove yourself in, the alien space that we were talking about, where you are a stranger and you are strange to others, means that you in a way you have to prove yourself constantly. So you're constantly on the edge. So your whole sort of body and mind are very much activated towards trying to navigate this hostile landscape. And I think Khaled explains it very well through the interviews that myself and Roger did. Roger has known Khaled for even longer, a lot longer than me. I think ultimately it's about the fact that you are able to, first of all, see the place with different eyes from everybody else. So you kind of observe little things about, other migrants in the UK, for example, and how they navigate that experience, but also because you have to prove yourself professionally, personally, every day, every minute of your existence in a place that is not your place and doesn't seem natural, and it's not very easy to navigate sometimes. You develop this acuity that allows you to then reflect in more interesting ways about your experience. So that's the way I understand the third eye that Khaled talks about. And of course, this kind of links back to Stuart Hall and others, sort of doubleness and double consciousness, Du Bois and so on, where you you have all of these sort of different experiences coming from different cultural places, and their intention, and sometimes they are in violent tension, and you're trying to kind of make sense of all of these differences. So yeah, I do believe that, if you look at the work of diasporic filmmakers, people who inhabit different cultural spaces at the same time, you can deduce this kind of ability to observe things that otherwise might be unnoticed, or express this edginess in a way of being on the edge all the time in new creative ways.
I wonder if you hadn't interviewed El Hagar, which film would you have chosen to discuss?
Um, in terms of diasporic films, I probably would have looked at Gurinder Chadha. I know she's a much more mainstream filmmaker, but I found her very interesting in terms of her sort of personal trajectory, because obviously she's of Indian origin, but she wasn't born in India. She was born in Africa. So she carries the experience of and the vision of her Indian ancestors, but also her family growing up in Africa, as well as the acute dislocation of that she experienced moving to the UK. And also because, she's a woman, and I think, she brings something else to filmmaking. But her films are also very typical of this kind of contradictions. Brick Lane is also an interesting film that I use with my students, partly because it's not such a good film, but it is about emancipation and finding some redemption in a hostile environment as well. So I think, I think we have to find the positive in what is otherwise a very negative and overwhelming context in which migration is discussed.
I think Julia had another question. I saw it pop into the chat.
Yeah, that's correct. She was commenting that maybe a
Thank
more
you,
niche.
Diana.
Thank
But
you.
thank you very
very
much,
much.
Diana.
Bye.
Speak to you soon. So maybe a more niche but worthy topic would be about returnees, those who may have gone back to their countries, which is another type of dislocation. And she was wondering if you had any observations in that area. There is usually in-betweens there, which is rarely talked about.
Yeah, one of my PhD students did very interesting research looking at what happened to the Albanian children born in Italy and Greece after the economic crisis of 2008, when a lot of Albanian families were forced to return to Albania. There's also work by my colleague Zana Vati on this subject. And the research is interesting in the sense that, you often have children who were born and grew up in a different environment, and then they're forced to return. They're forced because most of the time they're not consulted. The family, decides to go back for whatever reasons, usually economic, but not only. And the research was interesting in that the children were asked to represent Italy or Greece, and alongside to represent Albania, the kind of the two spaces, the spaces that they were very familiar with growing up in Italy, for example, and then the kind of alien space this time of Albania. And you could see the colors were different, the representations were different. Greece and Italy were much more colorful, much more bright. While Albania was quite sparse in that sense. And that was, an interesting observation, because obviously these kids were returning to their families, sometimes quite big extended families, and yet they were losing their friends, and so on. So for them, it was a process of, isolation. And it was interesting that you could see this happening in return. So their parents might have felt isolation while moving to Italy or Greece, but the kids felt the isolation the other way back. And through some of the fieldwork that I did, for example, in Italy or Spain, talking to a lot of Romanian migrants who were at the point of sort of decided whether they wanted to settle permanently abroad or return to Romania, I realized how difficult this kind of decision was, and fraught with all sorts of dangers. And I know from my own experience, I'm somebody who entertained the vision of return for a long time, thinking, oh yeah, one day we'll definitely retire to sunny and snowy Romania, and I'll kind of fit right back in. And now I realize this is an impossible project, and I've lost my country forever. And I feel as strange as alien in the country of my birth as I feel in the UK. I feel unmoored in that sense. And yes, this is not something that we talk about very often, but there is research emerging on it, and I think it's only natural. And hopefully somebody will make a film about it pretty soon.
Thank you. I think, conscious of the time, do you have any more questions, Nicola?
No, happy for you to.
Okay. In that case, usually we ask every single person that we interview one very simple question, and that is because we're essentially here for promoting knowledge and awareness of anything Romanian, including Romanian authors, even though they feel like they lost their country forever. You just said. What would you recommend to be read, given your experience in migration and the fact that we would be looking for something for the Romanian audiences and the English-speaking audiences?
Well, I don't know, because at the moment on my reading side table there, I have Cărtărescu's Solenoid. I'm a bit behind with his production, but Cărtărescu is an interesting, for me, writer, because he talks about alienation and isolation while at home. So you do realize it's a sort of universal human condition. But actually, I would like to tell you about this book, which is not a Romanian book. It's called The Almost Nearly Perfect People by Michael Booth. And the subtitle is Behind the Myth of the Scandinavian Utopia. And it's the kind of book I one day wish to write in connection to Romanians, because it talks about, identity and character. And it's told through a combination of witty observations, but also quite some serious interviews with historians and politicians and journalists about, what it's like to be Finnish, for example, or why Iceland, gambled its finances and its economy with such glee a few years ago. And yeah, if you thinking of gifting a book for Christmas, I'm hoping it's not too early to mention Christmas. Michael Booth's The Almost Nearly Perfect People is a good option.
Thank you very much. In which case, I think we are pretty much drawing to an end. We have one last comment from Anna Andronik. Thank you very much. A great workshop. She also feels alienated in both the UK and in Romania, and thinks many migrants from all backgrounds and nationalities feel the same. Social support is much needed and avoiding enclavization. So wishing everyone a great weekend. Before we part, though, I was hoping that I could entice you to come and join us again next month we have a dialogue with Dr. Alexandra Kyriak, and I think, Nicola, you can remind us what about. I will put the Eventbrite link in the chat so that you can join and sign up if you fancy it. And I will also add there the December interview with Dr. Teresa Steklikova. So thank you very much for your time and all your questions. Thank you again, Ruxandra, for preparing so thoroughly, as always.
Thank you so much.
I wish you all
Thank you,
a good
Nicola.
weekend, and thank you, Nicola, for always being there. Carta Divine. See you next time. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.